everyone, I'm Miss Maddie and this is our classroom for the day. I just want to talk about what I think is one of the most important films in history, and that is the 1997 Cinderella. And I don't think this film gets enough credit. I don't think we talk about this film enough. And it's a lot like how we don't talk about children's cinema or TV enough. And going into history for a moment, Joan Gans made a change in that. She helped create Sesame Street and changed the thinking that it didn't matter what children watched. I want you to think about your own stories. Your own media that you watch probably impacts you, right? I know it impacted me. I still think about the children's shows that I would watch, the children's movies that I would watch. And I know a lot of people still do because it's embedded in us. We think about those stories, the stories that we grew up with. It gave us role models. It made us think about who we are. Now let's get into why I think this movie is one of the most important films of all time. First of all, this film let everyone see themselves on stage. How? Color conscious casting. Now, what do I mean by color conscious casting? I mean that people were conscious, thoughtful about how they cast a show and didn't base it on someone's ethnicity or background, but also was conscious of what a casting said to society. And that's a big thinking thought, right? But it's really empowering because also this movie had the first time, as far as I know, being the first Black Cinderella and the first Asian prince. And everyone was represented. It didn't depend on who you were, where you came from. Everyone saw themselves in this retelling of Cinderella. Producer Deborah Chase said, "We are a multicultural society. You want to reflect everybody." Not all kids realized how impactful this was. I didn't. I just saw people who were meant to play that role and how beautiful they were and how amazing they did. And that this was the best Cinderella I've ever seen in my entire life. But for some people, they finally got to see themselves represented on stage. And that's really, really powerful. This was groundbreaking. In a world today where adult shows like Bridgerton exist, Bridgerton exists partly, I think, because of this movie. Here and Now senior editor Shiko Teori said, "To see a Black woman in this fairy tale story and just knowing that you as a Black girl could also live your own kind of fairy tale and fantasy, and you could have a really beautiful life and fall in love and be adored by the world, that's the message I got as a little girl watching this." Also gave characters agency. Now, what do I mean by agency? I mean that they had the capability to speak up for themselves. Now, in the original Cinderella, written by Rodgers and Hammerstein. The original Cinderella goes way back, all different cultures, all different places. It's everywhere. We love to tell this story, and I think that's also why this movie is so important, because this is the 1990s rendition that was incredibly impactful for an entire generation. The musical, originally by Rodgers and Hammerstein, their original version had Cinderella believing and following the story that you can depend on yourself at the end of the day. It took more than a fairy godmother to find happiness. Now that was omitted. That wasn't in their final version. But teleplay writer, like playwright, Robert L. Freeman put that back in to this version. And you can tell the Cinderella with 1990s values was encouraged to stand up for herself. And at the end of the day, she was ready to leave her home regardless of whether she got the prince or not. She wanted a life that was better for her, and she knew that that's what her father wanted. The other important thing was the prince was looking not only for just a girl, not only for just a shoe, not only for a foot to fit that shoe, but he was looking for the deep connection that he had with her. He was looking for a soulmate, the love of his life, someone he could talk to and spend time with. And that was a really lovely version of a prince to be represented, this prince didn't only have a kingdom. He had thoughts, and he had depth, and he also had the power to stay single if he wanted to. So that makes Cinderella and their relationship all the more important. Now, another important part of this film was that it was star-studded, even though it was low budget. Whitney Houston was originally wanted to be Cinderella, but as they tried to make this film and it took longer than anticipated, she realized she kind of aged out. They wanted a Cinderella that was younger. She wanted her Cinderella represented that was younger. And so she found Brandy. Allegedly, she helped guide Brandy and solidify Brandy's career. And I think that's also true for theater person Paolo Montalban. Although Paolo Montalban had theater and Brandy had the R&B career that she had, I think that this film was incredibly important for both of them, as much as it was important for all the little kids watching. But we also have Jason Alexander, Whoopi Goldberg, Bernadette Peters, Victor Garber, who had just finished a little movie called The Titanic. Bernadette Peters, who is a theater star, she even got her own song that was originally in The Boys from Syracuse, but they adapted the song to fit this Cinderella. It's dramatic and it's perfect for giving the evil stepmother a little depth. In building the story, we also think about the world around us. And this movie is beautiful. It's bright, beautiful, thought out, it's playful, and that's the scenic design in theater. But more of like the art department, and production design, set decoration in film. So we have Randy Sayre, Edward L. Rubin, Julie K. Fanton, Francie Byrne, and team to all thank. I'm jumping in from the future for just a second because in the design I want to talk about color theory really quickly because colors can mean something. So, looking at the beginning of the movie, Cinderella's in this earthy orange, and the prince also in disguise enters the town in this earthy orange, and that kind of is connotative with the village. And the village has a lot of that coloring, although there are many other bright colors incorporated. There are these deep blues and purples for royalty. In the ball scene, everyone is wearing these deep blues and purples, except for the stepsisters, who consistently throughout the film are wearing these accent colors that are in the film, but they are the main event, and they make themselves the main event with their fashion. It ends up being warped in the way that you wouldn't think because they are ingenuine and jealous, and so because of these personality traits that they learned, it almost feels like they don't fit in with the royals that are of this world and very kind, and they don't fit in with the commoners either. So anyway, that's a little bit of the color theory that I see. There are these beautiful light blues that help the prince and Cinderella stand out that are still part of this world. There are these beautiful earthy oranges that help us understand that this place is real, but also these bright colors that help us understand how magical it can be. All the designers in a film or in a show, a theater production, they all have to talk to each other to make sure that it follows this gorgeous path that everyone understands and builds this beautiful world and this beautiful story, which this film absolutely does. The lighting designer in film is usually called a gaffer, and I couldn't find a name for the person responsible for lighting design. Some people said it was the director, cinematographer. The director was Robert Icecove, the cinematography was Ralph D. Bode. It also could be the production designer, Randy Sayre. So whoever is responsible for the lighting, thank you. I also want to talk about the costuming. Again, they all have to talk to each other to make it work. Everything looks different. If the lighting's different, if the costuming's different, if the set's different. And we have Ellen Moroznik and her wardrobe department to thank for this film, for costuming. It's playful, bright, it worked with a low budget and no time. This designer even said, we did not have a huge amount of money and we had a finite amount of time. Nothing could be wasted. It was a very economical production. But allegedly, Whoopi wanted some real jewelry, as she should, playing the queen. Allegedly, she said, hey, I want real jewelry. And they said, we don't have the budget for that, Whoopi. I'm so sorry. And Whoopi said, no, call this person. I think we can borrow some jewels. I know a guy. And so they called up, and allegedly her jewels in this film are real. So that, I just think that's fantastic. Usually for a show, we think about all the elements, but we also want to think about the colorist in a film, which they put color back into a film to kind of help brighten it up and make it look more like it did in real life, or make it more dramatic. And the colorist for this film was Paul Lear. Now, the music and sound departments also blended and modernized this film, and it's so hard. A musical movie is so hard. You're blending songs that are sung, but also dialogue, also sound effects, also like the sounds of horses, the sounds of people murmuring in the background. That all has to be blended together to seem seamless. Let's also not forget to mention the choreography, which was by Rob Marshall and Carrie Lee Meadows. And this movie wanted to make you want to dance across the floor in one of those purple dresses. If you know, you know. The cinematography encapsulates the blend of movie and musical, and so you can tell that they did it on a budget because they're prioritizing simplicity to tell the story. And at the end of the day, that is the most important thing. The story is the most important thing. Now, looking at the power of movie magic, let's also go back in time through history, and we want to talk about the first movie magic. Now, the first movie magic in film, many is considered with Georges Méliès, who was an illusionist and theater person, but he was also a film person. He really became a film person. But around the same time, we also have
Alice Guy Blanc.
These people are French, and I'm probably doing a terrible job at their names. I'm doing my best. But Alice Guy Blanc, her movie about the Cabbage Fairy was also happening around the same time. And thinking about when movie magic really started, how we created the fantastical on film, we need to consider both of these people, I think, perhaps. Hello, let's get into a little bit more musical history, because I think that it is important, and I didn't originally record it, and I went, rats. So here we go. So the first musical of all time, allegedly, is considered The Black Crook. Now, at the same time, there's also Gilbert and Sullivan, operettas, and variety shows and vaudeville that all had a huge impact on the musical theater industry existing entirely. It didn't exist before this. But another musical that is considered one of the first musicals of all time is in 1927, Showboat. Now, on top of that, you also have that same year, it was a very eventful year, the first movie with sound called The Jazz Singer. So before that was like silent films. They didn't have people talking. You wouldn't see me speaking like this and being able to hear me at the same time. That just wouldn't happen. So another important factor of this is it wasn't even just that you could hear people talking for the first time. They were singing, they were dancing. It was a musical. Now, musicals continued to have an impact. They were starting to have more and more influence and growing as a medium at the same time, and that included that there was a series on radios where people could tell stories through jukebox musicals, so musicals that have pop music attached. That's through the 1930s and the 1940s. And from 1948 to 1954, there was also a special radio feature where there were weekly abridged musicals and operettas. So if someone didn't have access to the theater, that was fine. They could still be in the know of what was going on theatrically because they could listen to it on the radio. In 1944, the first TV musical, or what is considered the first TV musical, happened. And it was The Boys of Boise, which is a very fun name. You have influences around that same time, like the Ed Sullivan Show, etc., different variety shows, if you will. But this was a whole story and a whole musical in and of itself. And it was trying to make an event of TV. Musicals were still more popular, movies were still more popular, and As we get into an era after World War II, TV executives were thinking, where to now? How do we use this time? What film techniques do we use? And if we want to do theater for TV, how do we do it well? Because it's so hard and it's expensive and it's so easy to make a musical look terrible on screen. In 1953, Ford Motors sponsored a musical spectacular made for TV with Ethel Merman and Mary Martin, and this was all the rage. Again, it was hitting the special niche of it being a special event made for TV. As these influences were all the rage, TV executives were trying to revive this over and over and over again, but it was a little bit out of touch because at this time, into the 60s, movies were starting to have more influence than musicals. Even movie musicals were having an influence, sure, but they were still not comparative. Although it seemed like something that was really cool and awesome, a lot of the pop culture was not connected to New York theaters anymore. But this also helped, in it being out of touch, perhaps, it also helped in accessibility to the theater still. And it used very common stories that the public really love, like Cinderella and Peter Pan. So it's, again, still using that experimentalism and that crunchy space where it's not necessarily TV, it's not necessarily a musical, it's not necessarily theater, but it's all of that. And it doesn't have a quite perfect placement. And it's still experimental in how to make it the best that it can be, too. And this is not only for TV musicals, but also for movie musicals. It was still something of, how can we make this cool and continue to make it something that looks fabulous just as much as it looks fabulous live, because live theater looks fabulous and it's not comparative to movie musicals. So I digress. In 1955, we had Peter Pan. In 1957, we had Julie Andrews' Cinderella. And in 1965, we had Leslie Ann Warren's Cinderella. But after the 1960s, this influence started to really die down, which also makes the 1997 Whitney Houston Cinderella all the more important cinematically and media history-wise, because it's in that crunchy place of, it knows what it is, but how do we make it possible, and how do we make it fit when it's a movie, it's a musical, and it's made for TV, and it's still experimental. After the 1960s, TV musicals played as cult classics a bit, so they still have a huge influence on pop culture, but they're not as popular for everyday society. But still, movie musicals are still hitting, but they're becoming more like cult classics. You originally had movie musicals like Disney and Singing in the Rain, but now you're having Fame, which was so popular it became its own TV series in 1982. You have Grease, you have Little Shop of Horrors, you have Rocky Horror Picture Show, you have Mamma Mia, and those movie musicals are really popular because they're hitting a special place in cinema that makes it campy and fun, but also says something about society, but also is having an impact not only on the theater scene, but also on the film scene, and also in the TV land. And so it has a huge influence, right? And I think that TV movie musicals also have a huge impact. In 1997, allegedly, because I can't find the original documentation of this, there was record viewership for Whitney Houston's Cinderella, and unanticipated VHS sales that were also record-breaking. And I think that also could be why generations that grew up with the VHS just see it as an incredible movie, because there wasn't much that made it seem made for TV, except for a few blips that are like, oh, that's where a commercial was supposed to be. But they're so small and minute that this film made for TV really crosses over very easily into VHS and media made for everyday households, and a movie that has incredible influence. Now, when this was first made in 1998, there were a lot of awards, of course. Not as many wins as I would anticipate, but let's talk about that. The NAACP had nominations for Outstanding Actresses for Brandy and Whoopi Goldberg, and they also had a nomination for the Outstanding TV Movie category. Now, the Emmys seems like they don't have that kind of category, and so the nominations are a little weird, and I'll get into that. But they had nominations for Outstanding Music Direction, Outstanding Choreography, Outstanding Hairstyles, Outstanding Costume Design, Outstanding Directing for a Variety Music and Comedy Special, and they won Outstanding Art Direction for a Variety Music and Comedy Special. And from what I could read, I'm not an expert on the Emmys, it seems like that category was kind of a catch-all. You have shows like Cinderella be in that category, but you also have the Tony Awards and other TV specials that are variety shows that do not have a narrative, where this is a narrative, and this is a movie that just so happens to have originally been made for TV. So you can also think about how media today, YouTube today, it's hard to keep up with what is the most influential and popular, and we might say, oh, this movie won an Oscar, it's one of the most influential films of the time, but actually some YouTube channels might have more pop cultural impact than that movie of that year, right? So looking at this TV musical has had more impact than some Oscar-winning movies, in my opinion. But I think that if the more you would dig into this, the more you would find that. That's what I have to say about the movie history right now. Let's get back to the original video. In going back to movie magic and how magical this film is, it had an impact on society. It's beautifully done. It tells the story so well. The critics said the film wasn't perfect. Some people criticized Whitney Houston. Crazy. I would never. What do you mean? Also, some people didn't like the songs. Okay, why? Why? That's just my opinion. And some people just didn't think it was funny, or they didn't like it, but I don't know, that seems like maybe they just didn't want to like it. Could they have probably used more money? Probably. But look at what they did with such a smaller budget for such a beautiful film. And this movie gave a huge range of people the chance to see themselves depicted as royalty, and perhaps for the first time. And that's so powerful, and that's still so important. So this movie is movie magic. It's theater magic. It tells an impactful, powerful story that we want to tell again and again. It's impacting cinematic worlds to this day. It's showcasing a brighter future. It's empowering young people everywhere. And there is a large number of kiddos, or people who were once kiddos, that think about this film often and are empowered by this film and love this film. I think that is one of the most important films of all time. I know, hey, crazy thoughts. I think that maybe we need to be talking about this more, talking about how powerful children's movies are. And I would like for you to think about what films you think are most impactful for you. On top of that, I would like you to look up who made that film and how that film was made and why that film is important, maybe. And if you haven't seen this film, I highly recommend you see this film because, wow, I want you to remember at the end of the day that you're beautiful and amazing, and I believe in you. Have a good night. Love you. Bye.